Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kelly Renz, CEO and President of the Novo Group. Welcome to today's webinar on succession planning. It's easier than you think. We're going to start this at 1 o'clock Central on the dot to keep everyone aligned on their schedules. And I do know that we've got a pretty full house of attendees today. So again, thank you for your time. I know your time is valuable, and we're looking forward to sharing some great information with you about succession planning and specifically the tie of deliberate and intentional development of people in our organizations. So I do have this currently on a all lines held or a mute all setting. So if you have questions, you certainly can either raise your hand on the flyout menu on the right-hand side. You just click the little hand, and it will signal me that you have a question. You can also email questions in the question tab near the bottom. Logistically, as a follow-up to this, we've also provided 3 handouts for you that you'll notice out on the flyout towards the bottom. You'll see handouts, and if you expand the plus sign, you'll see that we've got 3 takeaways for you, and that's simply for you to click on, and you can download those at your leisure. So we thought that would be great for you to have some takeaways and some reminders of today's session. Okay, well, hopefully all of you can hear me. I am calling in from sunny and beautiful Milwaukee, Wisconsin today, so we're enjoying a wonderful summer. Hopefully you are wherever you are as well. I'm excited to be here today also with one of our partner groups, ADVISA, and you'll hear from their president, Heather Haas, here in just a few minutes. But why don't we go ahead and kick off with some real quick introductions. So as I mentioned, I'm Kelly Renz. I'm the President and CEO of the Novo Group, and the way I like to talk about my responsibilities, I'm on the hook for our results and ensuring that we delight our clients. I've spent the last 20-plus years of my career in different human capital leadership positions. I've led global organizations through all sorts of transformations in all different industries. I do tend to have a sweet spot in the tech and data sector, but have been across other organizations in retail and logistics, professional services, and other areas, and recognized that there was a gap in our marketplace for companies like the Novo Group who can help clients across their businesses with their talent effectiveness and recruitment solutions. So we focus primarily on helping organizations identify, find, recruit, and then transform their organizations and the talent within them. I'm going to have Heather for just a moment go ahead and introduce herself, as she's my partner in the presentation in just a little while. Heather, would you like to announce and introduce yourself to the group today?
Yes, thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Haas, President of ADVISA, and our firm is really focused on improving the world one leader at a time. So everything we do is about teaching and inspiring leaders to grow their own personal capabilities as well as improve the way they engage and build high-performance work cultures. Teaching and learning is a passion of mine. I have a background in education prior to entering the business world, and we specialize in leveraging assessments to help leaders and companies really gain better insight about themselves and their people, so that programs and experiences can be designed to help people reach their potential and help the organization grow and improve. ADVISA has been around since 1986, so we've got 30 years under our belt of advising leaders across all industries, and our team of consultants and client service professionals are really focused on building long-term relationships, and we leverage training, assessments, and software to help you get where you're trying to go with your teams.
Thank you, Heather. I will vouch for the fact that Heather and I have known each other for a long time, albeit not 30 years quite for either of us. We've known each other and worked together as colleagues and as advisors to each other over the years. So I'm excited that we're able to bring this to you today together. So let's get into the subject matter here about succession planning. One of my favorite quotes here is, "You don't build a business, you build people, and then the people build the business." And today's message is really building on the succession planning concepts that we've shared in a couple of our blogs and our previous webinar. And today's focus then will really narrow down into creating those deliberate individual development plans so that you do move the needle, most importantly, with your people, which is the outcome of succession planning. And before we jump into that, I do want to do a little recap because I do know that we've got quite a few new participants in this particular webinar from our last one. So let me take a few minutes just to recap and level set with you some of what we consider the key components of succession planning, which lay the foundation for what we're discussing here in just a bit. So we've learned what succession planning is not in some of our previous sessions and made it a real easy and accessible program for human capital leaders to get their heads around. It doesn't have to be a big, hairy, audacious, scary program within an organization. And honestly, most organizations have the information and data at their fingertips. And we know that it's not just for retirees. I know a lot of our industries are facing the talent cliff with retirees. The statistic is that 10,000 of our employees across the U.S. turn 65 every day. That's staggering. But succession planning is not just for those exiting the company on a retirement perspective, and we're going to cover that for a few minutes. We also know that the information for succession planning abounds. We just need to determine what's relevant for our organizations, and there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all of the data components. Probably most importantly is succession plans need to go deep into an organization, and if they're stopping at the, say, VP or leadership or even a director level in your organization, you may be missing some of the nuggets that are within a succession planning outcome. Another couple of key points is that we recommend you start your succession planning small. Use a pilot group. Big bang theories don't always work well in the human capital space, and we've learned that you test pilot with a few key stakeholders or groups that are champions of yours in the organization and let it grow a little bit more organically. And probably one of my favorites is if you have Excel, you can do succession planning. That puts it in reach of organizations of all sizes. You don't have to make huge, significant investments in complicated systems. You know, kudos to you if you've got some of the larger capabilities, but this is definitely within reach if you have Excel. So there goes that excuse of I don't have the time or money or systems to do it. But then ultimately, this last bubble here, the action plan, which is what we talk about today, is when you do the evaluation of the succession planning data, which we'll recap the key components next, ultimately, the action plan is what drives the success and the outcome and the needle mover, if you will, within your talent group. So that's what we're going to focus on. But we always like to recap and talk about the different components of data and the definitions of them, and we're going to cover these things called key roles, single points of failure, hypos, or as we call them at the Novo Group, the acceleration pool. And we're going to get into some of the simple tools for assessment and some ideas for you that are tangible and easy to implement to help you with that talent evaluation process and then the action plan development. So here on slide 8, pretty quick, we'll go through this recap for you. We talk about really 3 categories of important data components in succession planning. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start and what kind of evaluation even to do in succession planning. And that's where a lot of organizations start at the executive level, but really get lost or a little confused in how to make it relevant across all of their organization. So we talk about things first as key roles. Now, key roles are those types of positions in an organization that would cause significant business disruption if vacated, whether vacated on an emergency basis or vacated because somebody left an organization or took a new position. Key roles are those that create the pain points. And oftentimes I like to think about these a little bit differently than being executive positions. They're often key influencers in your business. Perhaps they're an informal leader within your organization that has the hearts and minds of your employees. Or perhaps it's a key account representative that has a relationship with one of your largest clients. And although that they're a individual contributor perhaps, they do carry a big influence on your customers' decisions. And those are the types of key roles. So a key role can go from the top of the organization all the way through the frontline contacts to your clients and even those individuals with maybe very highly specialized skills. We encourage the starting point for succession planning before you even talk about how to evaluate them. Try to find out what your scope of key roles are in your organization. That puts it a little bit more in perspective. And I've been asked before, well, what's the right number of key roles in an organization? What percentage of positions should fall into a key role category? And not being elusive on purpose, but that really does depend on the organization. But in general, you don't find more than 20 to 25% of the positions that would fall into that category, and that may even skew on the high end. So starting by evaluating and answering what positions would cause a significant business impact if vacated is a great litmus test for you to start your journey. The second group here is the single points of failure, or SPOF. And now we joke here at Novo that we're not happy unless we can put an acronym around something. So our SPOFs, as we refer to them, have a very similar look and feel to identifying key roles. These, though, tend to be those individuals with deep institutional knowledge. They have a very specific, maybe undocumented set of information about your organization. This can generally be found in areas of critical workflows, maybe detailed product knowledge. If any of you are from a software organization, you'll understand this could be somebody who has the affectionately called the secret sauce of certain algorithms and information, or maybe intellectual property that's not easily duplicated because they may have been even an inventor or a patent owner in your organization. One of the challenges with SPOFs is these individuals generally know how valuable they are and how the information that they hold is in some ways potentially a job protection, and can tend to hoard that information and can be a real challenge for your managers as they look at how to ensure the viability of the business should there be a vacancy created in a succession plan. So single points of failure follow a very similar process of evaluation as key roles, but they require a little bit more of a mitigation plan of how to ensure that that knowledge transfer and that risk is eliminated. And that is part of the action plan, which we'll cover in a little bit with you as we wrap up. And then the acceleration pool. So depending on the language you've adopted in your organization, you might call them high potentials. We tend to call it an acceleration pool because if you indicate you have high potentials in your organizations, employees generally think you may have low potentials in your organization, and nobody needs that additional challenge of vernacular. So we found that the acceleration pool, these are the individuals who are identified as potential or primary successors in your succession plan, that really would be the focus of where you make your investment developmentally in their growth, helping to accelerate, obviously, their growth and their readiness for the next position. These are also individuals that, when we walk you through some of the components of assessing them, should help drive your spend and your focus and your initiatives around employee development and career development, because this is the group that will help you grow your organization and are your next and future leaders. So with these three categories, key roles, single points of failure, and acceleration pool in mind, just wanted to let you know that those are really the foundational three groups of employees and opportunities that we evaluate when we talk about succession planning at Novo. One thing I love to share as we talk about this acceleration pool or hypos is you'll identify individuals as either a primary or a longer-term successor to somebody in your organization. And one of the things we often do, and this may be by accident, this may be out of resource constraints, sometimes we tend to create development plans and group plans in our training and learning development courses that don't really segment by the different career stages of truly a successor. Successors can be identified at what we call very early career stage. These are people who perhaps have had no supervisory responsibilities, maybe a first-time supervisor, or have had maybe limited positions but show very early promise. Their needs tend to be very different than those of somebody perhaps mid-career that has had managerial experience, has been through some positions, but may not be at the director level. And then ultimately, and truly different from those at a senior career, people who may have a business unit or P&L responsibility. We work with our clients to help them segment their acceleration pool of high potentials across the early and mid-career and senior career levels to make sure that the developmental programs put in place are very intentional and level appropriate. So it's something to think about as you look at your own acceleration pools in your organization. So let's jump into the meat of our data here today. And we're talking about that succession planning is really easier than you think. And we always recommend, as we said earlier, start small and grow. So let's talk a little bit about some of the approaches here. The great thing is human capital teams have a gold mine of data that they may not even realize is available to fuel succession planning. And if you step back and take a look, and we'll give you some ideas on the next slide of places to go get this information, is you probably have very established programs or processes. At the very minimum, you've got recruitment information and probably some performance information, and that's a great place to start to help you with your succession planning evaluation of talent. Succession planning is a very pragmatic, planful approach. So we're going to help you determine how to build your plan and then assess your talent in our next few slides. But what we've learned in working with our clients, oftentimes they feel that they don't have the necessary information at their fingertips to complete a succession plan. And the good news is you can start if you have any information. And here's some great examples of the types of things we've included in some of our clients' programs. So if you look at recruiting and hiring data, you amass information as people come into your organization. You learn a lot about them through the requirements of their jobs, through their job requisitions and the job descriptions. Oftentimes within the job requisitions and descriptions, you learn a lot about the competencies and requirements for success. You can also learn about their goals and objectives in their first 12 months. If you do any kind of SMART goal planning, you can really identify what are the types of things your team has to accomplish. The other is looking at your recruiting data. What does your recruiting data tell you around source of hire? Where are your best employees coming from? What kinds of people are most successful in your organization that you've hired? Go back and look at their history. Where did they come from? What was their education? What were some of their experiences prior to your organization that may have fed their success? Some of the other things, too, is you look at other accomplishments you have in-house. These could be things like certifications that you do, or test scores, or degrees and awards. You may have other information about employee recognition programs. You can learn about those types of activities and understand who your best talent is. So let's say you want to look at your recruiting and hiring data for succession planning. One of the places that you could really leverage the data here listed in the red box is perhaps you identify all individuals that come in to your organization with a certain set of experience as a litmus to success. That might be something you target as a career group. You also have performance measures. So you may not have one comprehensive program for performance as a whole. And I know a lot of organizations are going away from performance evaluations altogether, but at the end of the day, we still have performance metrics and objectives to meet as an organization. You can use the scoring systems within that to help you identify components of your succession plan. You can look at satisfaction surveys, competency assessments if you do those with your organization. You can actually map performance to core values, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Performance review evaluations. Even if you do more informal checkpoints, say after the end of a project versus an annual system, you still have performance feedback available. Depending on the type of organization you are in your industry, you may have productivity measures, and you can set the objectives there to understand what is a high potential and a high performing individual. You can look at profitability across different segments. So if you're a larger organization, perhaps you have different metrics by division, department, product. There's all sorts of ways to slice and dice the profitability measures to really look at which departments tend to have the best performance, and then you can start digging into them from a succession planning perspective. But probably most important is, for today's conversation, is looking at developmental assessments as a key component to your succession plan. So let's say you've identified your key roles, you've identified your single points of failure, and as a result of looking at who could be the successors for both those groups, which would probably yield your acceleration pool, you have a moment where you say, okay, now what? Now I know who my acceleration pool is, I know who I want to invest in, but what are some of the things that you can do and put in place as mechanisms to help further refine and understand their individual development needs? There's so many different ways to slice that through aptitude tests. You can do 360s. There's business acumen reviews. You can do mentoring. Here we even show other skills and leadership training. And in a few minutes, Heather's going to walk us through some additional ideas of how you can really make that individualized. You might ask yourself at this point, okay, that's a lot of information about succession planning. If I know who my acceleration pool is, what are some of the things I need to evaluate about them to really assess what they need from a development perspective? We're going to start with what I call the oldie but goodie, the 9-box. And most of you have probably been exposed to one someplace or another. And they're a tried and true mechanism that offers a very systematic and consistent approach to defining the different levels of performance and the different levels of potential within an organization so that you can help really measure your talent in a more cohesive fashion. One of the things that we like about the 9-box tool still is that it's very visual. And if you think about how managers and others learn about talent, they're very visual in orientation, and oftentimes using a very large system or giving them complex reports can be overwhelming. We find that the highly visual tool of a 9-box, and still utilized by organizations like GE and McKinsey today, is another lens and another format in which you can give the visual to your managers to see how you rank and stack your employees against each other. As I mentioned, it assesses individuals on 2 dimensions. It's on their past performance as well as what you identify as their professional. And this is just an example of a sample 9-box. And you can see we've created definitions in the boxes here. And the future leader box in the top right is really the individuals will fall there with your highest, they demonstrate your highest potential and your greatest investment, because you can see that the arrow on the bottom of performance shows it going high to the right, and on the left the potential going high towards the top. When you ask about where do you really want to invest the developmental time and resources in your acceleration pool, most of your acceleration pool will likely fall into the boxes listed here as 1, future leader, 2, growth employee, 4, high impact performer. And those are the areas where you can move the needle for somebody's performance, skills, and capabilities because they've demonstrated either high performance and or high potential, which are the 2 formulas together. That doesn't mean that every box doesn't deserve attention on here. They certainly do. The majority of the employees will fall into the core employee box. It's the good old-fashioned bell curve concept. And then you've got some really highly valued individuals in here, like number 7, your trusted professionals. They may be high performance, but perhaps on the potential they're in a well-placed level. They may not be your next division leader, but perhaps in their niche and in their spot, they're exceptional performers. Those are your retention focus. Chances are you may not see them in your acceleration pool because they may not be prepared to go to that next level, but they're maybe in a different category for you. So succession planning really focuses, for the most part, on the boxes 1, 2, and 4. Now the descriptions in this 9-box too can be adapted to your culture and your language. Not everyone would want to have a box number 3 called Enigma. That's the one where we have to figure out what we're going to do with somebody because they just aren't probably in the right place. We have to determine whether or not we can turn that around. There's different verbiage, and these are just examples for you. When you look at your acceleration pool, there's 2 things that we really encourage you to evaluate and assess which fuel your development plans. When you look at mapping your core competencies to your acceleration pool, and we'll give you a visual in just the next couple of slides of a sample rating system, competencies are important. You probably will have some sort of core competencies on a corporate level. We call this the price of entry to an organization and the things that you expect all employees to have. And you may have evolved to also have job group or divisional competencies that are more job specific. Maybe you have a couple within your organization. We find that very common in manufacturing organizations where different technical skills are required. You may also find that in other intellectual property type environments, etc. But being able to have some set of criteria such as competencies to map your acceleration pool will help you really identify where you need to invest your dollars. So for example, let's say you have a core competency called financial acumen. And for your organization, it's important that your employees understand how you function financially. They're able to articulate financial impacts of their decisions. And let's say as you went through an assessment, you found that financial acumen as a competency was one of your lower rated areas for your acceleration pool. Most likely that is where you'd want to put your developmental opportunities and your efforts to help bring that up, and we'll show you how to evaluate that. Sometimes overlooked as we look at succession planning and mapping is also to core values. So core values are cornerstones of the organizational behaviors and what we call the rules of how we interact with each other, what is expected in the treatment, as well as just hits to a very foundational level of the morals of the organization. We highly recommend that you integrate your core values into your acceleration pool assessment as well to make sure that you're growing and nurturing and developing individuals who will carry those very key cornerstones into your future. So here's an example of a rating system. So let's say you've got Joe Schmo as one of your individuals in your acceleration pool. You would evaluate Joe in this particular rating. Let's use the example of the financial acumen. Let's say you had to look at Joe and say you have to rate his financial acumen as a competency, and it's either going to be a strength, could be potential, it could be adequate or satisfactory is another word we use there sometimes. Could be something that needs further development. Perhaps it's an unproven area, or it's a blind spot. Maybe there's zero exposure to that. Maybe it's something he doesn't see as a valuable skill set to learn, and that could be a career roadblock for him. You can actually use this rating scale just against all of your core competencies and your core values the same. Let's say that your core competency is teamwork, that you believe in teamwork. I'm sorry, your core value is teamwork. And let's say same thing with Joe, and you're evaluating, same rating system can apply. And let's say you go through your acceleration pool and you have 50 individuals who fall into that pool, using easy HR math here. So of those 50 individuals, let's say on the core value of teamwork, you find that there's a really good percentage, let's say more than 50%, needs further development in teamwork. Maybe they struggle in understanding how to navigate informal leadership, or perhaps managing within a matrixed environment. There's all sorts of elements of teamwork that could be evaluated. You'd be able to know that in order for that acceleration pool to meet the expectations of teamwork as you define as a core value to your business, you would tie that to your learning and development initiatives. It makes common sense out of your programs, and it helps you make sure that you're spending time on the right things in your business with your precious dollars and resources. Another quick refresher component is the readiness ratings. So within your acceleration pool, you've mapped those to say that, Joe Schmo is available and ready for a key position sometime in the future. You need to know when in the future so that you can map them really to that early career, mid-career, or senior career level. So you would identify whether or not Joe is ready in a year, 2 to 4 years, 5+. Also important is replacement and well-placed. Replacement may indicate that while Joe is an earmark for somebody in a key role, perhaps we've got some other performance issues to address and we need to remediate that. You'd be an HR hero being able to identify those types of individuals and helping the managers work through those challenges. Or how about well-placed? Those are the individuals who are adequately performing, contributing, but really aren't going to be somebody who moves up to the next level. Really decide how you address that particular talent pool to keep them engaged, but perhaps they're not going to go through your leadership development programs, for example. This helps you even further refine your acceleration pool into levels. Once you have your assessment complete for your organization and you know who your key roles are and your SPOFs, and you've identified your acceleration pool, you've assessed them against your competencies and core values, and maybe there's some other metrics in the business that are important. Now you have data. You have information power at your fingertips to say, okay, I've now got to create the action plan. It's the so what answer. to all of the work that you put into succession planning. And what we look at as an action plan should be something that is an ongoing, annualized process. Your action plan really can be your talent roadmap. It will fuel the information of how you make investments in your people. It'll help fuel understanding who's going to do your talent acquisition strategic pipelining for you. Where are those gaps? Where do you need to buy the talent in the market versus build it within? This talent roadmap from succession planning is probably the most valuable way you can understand your talent. Then within that group, you know that you've got individuals that you need to retain, you need to help grow, and you need to help develop. And ultimately that's going to come with very targeted career growth as well as intentional development initiatives. And understanding and unlocking the potential in each individual is going to be the hardest part of your job, but there are wonderful tools and capabilities out there. And I'm going to turn this over to Heather to walk us through a couple of those capabilities and examples to keep you thinking about how you can create those intentional development initiatives. So Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you with our next slide.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Certainly being intentional about developing the talent in your accelerant pool requires planning, long-term commitment, and tools. And that's where we really specialize in terms of putting the right tools in the hands of our clients to do just that. What I'm going to do for the next few slides is highlight some of the tools for defining and developing leadership competencies, as well as share an approach for designing a year-long leadership academy. And I noticed that certainly we have some ADVISA clients here on the line today. So I hope what I will be sharing in the next few minutes will give you some new ideas about how to extend your current use of our tools. So what you see here, development starts with definition. A lot of times, once companies zero in on that pool of emerging leaders, they're really excited to start doing training and start putting programs in place. But one of the most important things that you do before all of that is really start to define what are the knowledge, skills, abilities, behaviors, values, etc., that are critical to an individual's development at different stages of leadership. And certainly leader development is a journey. It starts with self-awareness. And when we are self-aware about our natural tendencies, capabilities, even limitations, then we can self-manage or make choices about how to behave and engage other people depending on the situation. And when we're engaging other people more effectively, we're more likely to achieve business results. And we call this kind of the inner and the outer work of leadership. However, self-management, making choices about how to show up, is only possible when an individual is aware of what is expected at different levels of leadership within the organization. And that's often a real blind spot for emerging and up-and-coming leaders, is they're not sure how behaving as a team leader changes and what's expected of me when I go from leading my team to now leading a department, or when I go from leading my department to leading an enterprise. So that's why the definition of the knowledge, skills, abilities, behaviors especially, and values for successful leadership at various levels, that definition needs to precede the design and implementation of leadership programs. And this is where assessment tools can be especially helpful. So on the next slide, what you will see, if we could advance there, you're going to see here next a picture of the job analytic tool that is within the predictive index system that we provide. This tool is really helpful because it creates a way for you to objectively define both the behavioral and cognitive, in some cases, demands of the leadership roles within your company. And the process of doing the job analysis includes a careful review of the job description and responsibilities before going through this exercise to zoom in on the behavioral and cognitive pieces. And in our experience, best practice is for multiple people to provide input into this, into the defining of the critical behaviors. Usually leadership one level above the role, peers to the role, and perhaps some input from one layer below will really create a very accurate and well-rounded view of what's required for success. Next, on the next slide, I'd like to give you a picture of how we look at the way individuals match up with key roles. So the reason for benchmarking the behavioral and cognitive demands of a leadership position is that people will naturally excel and perform at higher levels when the work that they do aligns with their natural strengths. So the predictive index system is designed to give you maximum visibility between roles and people, which is what you can see here. There are two sides to the system. On the job side, the job analytic tool helps you benchmark position requirements. And on the people side, there is an individual assessment that people take which measures one's innate motivating needs and behavioral drives so that the best decisions can be made about fit. And when someone's natural strengths align with what the role requires, maximum engagement and performance is possible. And certainly, if one's motivating needs are unmet by the work that they're asked to do, that requires some adapted behaviors. It requires energy. And when an individual has to adapt their natural self, their natural strengths too much to meet the demands of a new role, it can really be draining over the long term and performance may be compromised. So in developing future leaders, we want to deeply understand these fits and gaps so that we really can take a strategic and targeted approach to refining that acceleration pool. So let's move to the next slide, and I'll show you an example of what one client was highlighting as really the leadership competencies and expectations for a next level leader in their organization. And so this table includes personality, emotional intelligence, and cognitive descriptors. So the predictive index, behavioral, and cognitive solution was used, as well as the EQI 2.0 to aid in the definition of these. And so if you look down the list, what they're saying is at this level of leadership, we really need someone who's more of a generalist, who can see the big picture, think strategically, make decisions without all the information, and take risks. They're being very explicit and clear. This is what the next level up requires. It also requires the ability to manage competing priorities effectively, operating with a bias for action. They need people who can perform under pressure and operate at a fast pace. They need leaders who can build trust and credibility quickly, leaders who are enthusiastic collaborators, which is different than just a collaborator, engaging communicators, and leaders who take more of a selling versus telling approach to getting people on board. You can see that quick start is called out as very important, assimilating new information quickly, establishing situational fluency in unfamiliar situations, and they need leaders who can toggle very quickly between knowing and doing. Similarly, moving on to learning agility, this is more of a cognitive capability. They need leaders who can apply knowledge and insight to solve problems and reach sound judgments, and people who can synthesize disparate data to draw meaningful conclusions. Impulse control is an emotional intelligence competency. It's about choosing a response versus reacting. It's about maintaining composure and professionalism in the face of high stress or very difficult circumstances. And finally, reality testing was something that's very important in their industry, that leaders need to manage their emotions and use the best available data in making decisions and creating plans. So you can see here, there's a lot that goes into defining and calling out. There's a lot of things leaders have to do, but this organization wanted to make sure that these things were called out so that their accelerant pool could keep an eye on these things and could engage in development experiences that would give them this kind of exposure. So certainly being explicit about what the role requires is important, but you also have to be realistic about what can be taught and developed through training and coaching, and which things the emerging leader may need to work around as they move up. For instance, an emerging leader who's naturally more methodical and deliberate will bring stability and process orientation when planning and scaling up a new initiative. However, they may need to rely on trusted colleagues who bring natural quick start and a sense of urgency to put out fires and take quick action when unexpected challenges arise in the implementation phase. So self-awareness for that leader about here's my strength in certain situations can also be a weakness for me enables that leader to engage other people to help them fill in the gaps. And this is really key for this type of leader as she might move up in the organization. Another leader who may be more introspective and analytical in this organization may need to seek out some training to develop influence and presentation skills so that they can be more effective as the social collaborative demands of the job increase throughout his career track. So this is an example of an individual where training and learning new skills could be exactly the right strategy here. So coach what is coachable, make sure you have clarity about what you need so that you can be intentional. So let's look at the next slide here. And when we go beyond job fit, beyond the coaching, and we start to think more programmatically, we do a lot of that work at ADVISA, and I wanted to share kind of what we've learned and where we're coming from in the way of best practices as you think about designing programs or pulling in a partner to help you with a leadership development program. Certainly, first and foremost, the belief, it's important that key leadership, highest level leadership, believes in that first bullet point, that if in fact we invest in leadership development, that's an investment in the future success of our organization. Beyond that, what we know is that training and these kinds of programs are most effective when the content and the program outcomes are closely aligned with business goals. Those two things really cannot be separated if the leadership development is going to be effective. The business landscape needs to be considered, the industry trends and dynamics and what's going on. All of that, to the greatest extent possible, should really be woven into how the program is designed and what content is included. Certainly, I've already highlighted how valuable the smart use of assessments can be for defining what you need in leadership, but it's also really powerful in terms of creating breakthrough self-awareness for the participants themselves. That ability to hold up a mirror and see myself in a new way can be really helpful. It's also important to keep in mind that it requires a lot of time for leaders to truly develop new paradigms and new skills if you want them to move beyond just self-awareness and actually move to insight, action, and results. So while shorter workshops where you send people away for a week or a few days, those are helpful, but those kinds of experiences do not allow for the kind of transformative leadership development that we're talking about if you're taking the long view on succession planning. Also wanted to highlight how valuable peer-to-peer learning opportunities and action learning projects can be through a more long-term approach like this. It really increases the on-the-job application of new skills and competencies, and we find that even within a larger cohort group, people can learn as much from each other and from small groups or triads as they can from the whole group. Also, outside coaching. When we design our leadership academies, there is a component, individuals are creating their own development plans, and they also get a couple of outside coaching sessions as well as internal support so that they can really have the space to uncover hidden assumptions and deal with the barriers that may be hindering risk-taking and that may be getting in the way of their growth. And then finally, context is very important to someone's development. So the participant's direct manager must be involved and supportive of their participation in a program like this and must give them the encouragement and the time to focus on their own development. So hopefully this list summarizes some best practices for you to consider. So let's move on and talk about one of our Leadership Academy models where we're designing kind of a year-long experience for leaders that may be in this accelerant pool. And this framework, this REAL, Real Leadership Framework, really just serves as a general framework for an individual's development journey. That, you know, it's not just about achieving business results. That has to be there certainly for a leader to be effective, but those results require leaders to choose effective behaviors. And those are behaviors that meet other people's needs, behaviors that help establish mutual purpose between people so that the work can be moved forward. So there's a whole volume of content that's all about what are those effective behaviors. And then the relationship piece is huge. Everything that happens in work and life happens within the context of a relationship. So a great amount of the content in our Leadership Academies is about building trust and behaving and communicating in ways that bring people closer together. And then finally, certainly the content, the MBA type content and the skill building that happens within an academy like this reinforces just that reality that leaders need to be lifelong learners. The world is always changing, and leaders need to stay fresh and stay sharp. So lots of new cutting-edge content is introduced to help leaders be really staying on the front edge of all of that. So let's look at how one of these academies might be structured. This is kind of the difference here. What I'm trying to illustrate is the difference between a training workshop where you go away and you learn a thing in a short amount of time versus more of a development journey or experience. You can see here we have an academy coming up next year in Michigan, actually. And you can see the sessions. There's a series of sessions, everything from mindfulness and that self-awareness, beginning to get your head around what does it mean to be on this leadership journey. There's some predictive index training, bridging differences, motivating others is what people experience in the second session. Emotional intelligence is introduced as well in the third session, as well as development planning and understanding generational differences. And then we move through to really more of the skill building pieces of coaching, asking questions, active listening, innovation, performance improvement, creativity, as well as change management and frameworks for strategic thinking. And then the program really culminates with participants sharing their action learning projects where they have taken the tools, the strategies, the skills they've learned, and they've applied that to a real problem in their company, and they present the results of those projects. And of course, part of this comprehensive experience is that developmental coaching and the individual approach that we take, and the development planning and the individual setting goals, and then doing the things necessary to improve in those areas. So let's, at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly. Hopefully this is giving you a nice look at how to take an individual and very intentional approach to both defining what the competencies are for various leadership roles in your organization, some of the tools that you can use to do that, and then giving you a very practical, real-life example of how those programs can look. So I'm going to let Kelly bring it all together now here at the end.
Thank you, Heather. Great job in sharing that. So just some key points as we wrap up here, and then there are some questions that I will respond to for the group as well. You know, the human capital groups have the information to drive succession planning, and we encourage you to start small. Define your key roles, define your SPOFs. Start there to understand the scope of where your attention needs to go. And out of identifying those and their potential successors, you'll grow your acceleration pool. And in turn, that acceleration pool is really who you hone in on the developmental opportunities. And from Heather's message here and the information shared, you can see the importance of the individual development plan and understanding that it's a journey, it's not a sprint. We've created in the blog that was shared, and you can find this at thenovogroup.com, the checklist of some of the materials and elements of your human capital data and components that you already have in-house to help you with the information gathering and the data management of what you could look at for your succession planning criteria. A succession plan, though, without an action plan is an incomplete process, and the action plan is ultimately what will create those clear talent development objectives and fuel all of your other initiatives. I'd even go so far to say if you did no other objectives other than succession planning each year, you'll fuel a number of things as a result. You'll fuel your recruitment initiatives and be able to create strategic pipelines and determine where you need to hire athletes that can fill gaps for the short term and the long term. You'll also understand your risk management. If you look at the importance of business continuance plans for some organizations, talent is a component of that. You could look at your SPOFs as an area to remediate and make sure that institutional knowledge and proprietary information doesn't walk out the door should they leave. And then ultimately your acceleration pool. This is your highest potential group of employees who you need to focus and retain. And in today's hyper-competitive recruitment landscape, you need to focus and spend the time on the right areas. And it's very easy to look at canned leadership programs or off-the-shelf programs, but instead take a very intentional approach to assessing your organizations against their competencies and your core values, and making sure that the programs speak to the individual, like the one through Predictive Index, understanding their key motivational needs so that you get the most out of those programs and for the dollars you spend. And that talent development must be deliberate. It doesn't happen by accident. You need to be focused and individually aligned with an individual's needs as well as the organization's. And probably above all, for those of us in human capital that have to be able to justify and manage to very tight budgets, we know we don't have unending resources in human capital. This helps create the line of visibility to those that you need to influence on where to spend the dollars on precious resources in human capital. Using the cross-reference of competencies and needs across your organization gives you a very focused element to your programs. So ultimately, today's message is really to help you unlock those secrets of succession planning, understanding you can start small by focusing in on key roles and SPOFs, and then let your acceleration pool help drive your investment in other talent initiatives, whether it be assessments, whether it be in coaching and development, whether it be in a rotational program in your organization. It will really come to light what it is you're needing to do. Let me, with that, address a couple of the questions that have come out. So one of them that's come up several times is, will we make this slide deck available to participants? The answer is yes, we can email it to the registered participants following this. It is not one of the 3 handouts that we have listed, but we can do that for you. Another question was, Heather, over to you on this one on Predictive Index. How could our organization learn a little bit more about the Predictive Index assessment? Heather, you might have us on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I was on mute. Certainly you can contact me directly. I think my contact information is hopefully on the handout that's out there, but my email address is hhaas@advisausa.com. You can also visit the ADVISA website, advisausa.com. And you'll find a wealth of information about Predicted Index as well as some of the leadership development programs that I shared, and we'd be happy to let you take the assessment for a test drive and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Heather. Very good. Another question came in asking, does the Novo Group assist organizations in developing competencies and mapping those to their talent? And the answer is yes. We can provide a workshop and a process in which an organization can help identify both core competencies as well as determine if an organization needs job-specific competencies. And you're certainly free to reach out to me as well for more information. You can also visit our website at thenovogroup.com for more information about our Talent Effectiveness Consulting program. Another question that came in was asking about our perspective on, do you let the acceleration pool know that they're part of the pool, or do you not let them know that they are part of the pool? Now, of course, that's a cultural question, and I'll jump in there. We highly recommend that the acceleration pool know and understand that they're part of a succession planning outcome. It is very much a retention tool. It's an engagement opportunity with one of your high potential individuals. And it opens all sorts of opportunities for dialogue and focus on where their developmental needs are. And it's interesting that statistics show that when an individual understands that they're part of a selected program, their desire to achieve and be successful within it is higher than if they don't realize that they're part of a selected group. Now, the other element of that is, does that create internal competition within an organization, or can it create challenges with individuals who may not be part of an acceleration pool? And I'll put my Chief HR Officer hat back on for this. And I've always welcomed the conversations and the opportunities to talk with people that may feel that they've been left out of that program, to help them identify and understand what it takes and what they would need to do as an individual to be part of that program. It's within reach, and the developmental conversation that comes out of that is so valuable to help that individual achieve their goals. And a little internal healthy competition around striving to be successful is not always a bad thing culturally. It just depends on how it's fostered and communicated and how it's encouraged that people participate in their programs.
Yeah, if I could jump in there too, Kelly, I think your point about, what happens when people feel they've been left out of the accelerant pool or the special programming, that's another reason why having clearly defined what it takes to be in that pool and what it takes for next level leadership is so important, because if somebody comes to you with that, you're able to really have, as Kelly said, a meaningful development conversation to say, here's what that requires, and here's where you are. So let's talk about, do you need training? Do you need coaching? How are you going to fill that gap so that you really have equipped yourself to be more successful at that level of work?
Very good. Thank you, Heather. Okay, two last questions very quickly. One request was that for an attendee that may have participated in the prior webinar on the first part of succession planning, we will be happy to also send that first deck along with this, which does play into some of the outlines or flow charts of how to execute a succession plan. So that was a little bit more of a nuts and bolts of how to. So for that, we will include that when we send out this deck so that you have the complete 2-webinar series on that. And then the last question is for you, Heather. What is the cost of the leadership program from ADVISA?
Yeah, as you might guess, it depends on how much customization and how integrated the program is with existing business initiatives, et cetera. But generally, it's a per head fee that can range anywhere from $7,000 per participant to $10,000 per participant, depending on the variables there relate to the number of sessions, the amount of individual coaching throughout a year that a company might want their high potentials to receive, and then how many different types of assessments and the level of feedback, individual feedback that's included with that. So we take a very customized approach, but generally speaking, that's the ballpark that you're in for a year's worth of that kind of MBA level programming. But certainly if you have questions, and we've worked with all budgets and companies of all sizes, so there's always a place you can start, and there's always something you can do that's going to fit within the training and development budget that you may have available to you now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that is the conclusion of our session today. Thank you so much for your time. You can always reach out to Heather or I. Our information is still in the registration here, and we'll make sure that we send out the slide decks to you so you have this as a reference. Thanks, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.